In September 1994, a park officer named David Noble lowered himself on a rope into a canyon that almost no one had ever entered. It was in a rugged wilderness, less than 200 kilometers from Sydney, a maze of deep sandstone gorges, so steep and so hidden that parts of it had never been properly explored. At the bottom, in the damp shade, he found a stand of tall trees he did not recognize. The bark looked strange, dark and lumpy, like bubbling chocolate. The leaves did not match anything he knew. So he took a small piece back with him. That piece went to botanists, and when they looked at it, they did not just fail to identify the species. They recognized it from the wrong place. They had seen this tree before, but only pressed into stone. It matched fossils. Fossils of a kind of tree that the record said had died out around 2 million years ago, long before any human being existed. David Noble had not found a rare tree. He had abseiled into a canyon and walked up to something that was supposed to be extinct, a living member of a line so old it had shared the planet with the dinosaurs, standing quietly at the bottom of a gorge, in a country that had mapped almost everything except the inside of that one hidden valley. Take 1 second to subscribe before we dive in. You will not want to miss where this one ends. The tree was given the name Wollemi pine, after the wilderness where it was found, though it is not really a pine. It belongs to an ancient family of conifers, a group that was widespread when dinosaurs were alive and has been shrinking back ever since. Its relatives are known mostly as fossils. This particular line, the one Noble found, appears in the fossil record going back a very long way, and then the fossils stop. For roughly the last 2 million years, there is nothing. As far as science was concerned, the tree was simply gone, one more branch of an old family that had not survived into the modern world. To understand why finding it alive was such a shock, you have to understand how old this line really is. Fossils of its family go back to the age of the dinosaurs, tens of millions of years, to a time when the southern continents were joined together and these conifers were common across them. As the continents drifted apart and the climate shifted, that family thinned out, species by species, over an enormous span of time. Finding a living Wollemi pine was not like finding a rare animal. It was like reaching into a museum case of stone imprints and having one of them turn out to be alive and still growing. Scientists described it, at the time, as the botanical equivalent of finding a small living dinosaur. Except it had survived. In one place, and only one. When botanists went back to properly survey the canyon and the few gorges near it, they found how thin the survival really was. There were not forests of these trees. There were fewer than 100 mature individuals in the wild, in total, clustered in a couple of narrow, deep canyons. That is the entire wild population of the species, not 100,000. Fewer than 100 adult trees, in a space you could walk across in minutes, hidden inside one wilderness. To put that number in perspective, there are individual city streets with more trees along them than there are wild Wollemi pines on the entire planet. The whole species, everything left of a line that once stretched across ancient continents, would fit comfortably into a single small orchard. The obvious question is how. How does a tree from before the last ice ages, a survivor from a family in slow retreat for tens of millions of years, hang on in a single spot while vanishing everywhere else? The answer is the canyon itself. These gorges are deep, narrow, and sheltered. Down at the bottom, the climate barely changes. The steep walls hold in moisture, block the worst of the heat, shade the ground, and buffer the trees from the extremes that swept over the rest of the continent as the world dried and cooled. While the climate outside changed again and again, wiping this tree out across its old range, the floor of that gorge stayed just stable enough, just wet enough, just protected enough for a handful of trees to keep going. A place like that is called a refuge. It is where a species goes to wait out a world that no longer suits it. And the Wollemi pine is well built for waiting. It has an unusual trick. Instead of relying on a single trunk that lives or dies as one, a single tree can send up many trunks from its base and resprout new ones if the old ones are damaged. Some of these trees are, in effect, very old individuals that have been renewing their own trunks for an extremely long time. It is a slow, patient, stubborn way to exist, and it is exactly the kind of strategy that lets something survive in one small place across an enormous span of time. Everything about the tree looks like a survivor from another age, once you know what you are looking at. It can grow tall, up to around 40 meters, with fern-like foliage that changes as the tree matures. But the most striking feature is the bark. It is dark brown and covered in soft, bubbling nodules, so unusual that people who see it often say it looks like breakfast cereal, or bubbling chocolate, or something boiling and then frozen in place. That strange bark was part of why David Noble could not place the tree. It did not look like the trees around it, because it was not related to the trees around it. It was the last of a family that most of the forest had never met. The wild trees also grow in a very particular way inside the canyon. They are not spread evenly. They sit in the wettest, most sheltered pockets, along the gorge floor near water, exactly where the microclimate is most stable. Move a short distance up the canyon walls, and the conditions change, and the Wollemi pines stop. The species is not just confined to one wilderness. It is confined to specific damp corners inside specific gorges within that wilderness. Its entire hold on existence is a matter of a few hundred meters of the right ground. But that same survival left the species with a hidden weakness, and it is the heart of this story. When researchers studied the genetics of the wild Wollemi pines, they found something remarkable and alarming. The trees are almost genetically identical to one another. Across the whole wild population, there is almost no genetic variation at all. In practical terms, they are close to being a single individual copied many times over. This is what happens when a species is squeezed down to a tiny number and then survives, isolated, for a very long time. Whatever variety it once had is gone. For the tree, in its quiet canyon, that did not matter for a long time. But it creates a terrible vulnerability. When every individual is genetically almost the same, they all share the same weaknesses. If something comes along that one of them cannot resist, then none of them can resist it. A disease that can kill one Wollemi pine can, in principle, kill every wild Wollemi pine, because to that disease they are all the same target. And that is why the greatest threat to this tree is not a chainsaw, and not even fire. It is something you cannot see. There is a microscopic organism, a water mold, that lives in soil and attacks the roots of plants, causing a disease known as dieback. It has already devastated native plants across parts of Australia. It spreads in mud and water, and one of the most efficient ways it travels is on the soles of human boots. A single visitor, walking into that canyon with a trace of infected soil on their shoes, could introduce a pathogen that the entire wild population, being nearly identical, might have no defense against. So, the location of the wild Wollemi pines became one of the most closely guarded secrets in conservation. The exact canyon is not published. It is illegal to go there without authorization. The small number of scientists who visit follow strict procedures to make sure they carry nothing in on their feet or their equipment. The rarest, oldest tree most people have never heard of is protected less like a plant and more like a state secret, precisely because the thing that could kill it is invisible and could arrive on a shoe. Then, in the summer of 2019 and 2020, the other great threat arrived, and it was anything but invisible. That was the season of Australia's enormous bushfires, when huge areas of the country burned, and the fire front moved toward the very wilderness where the Wollemi pines grow. A tiny hidden population of the last wild trees of an ancient species was about to be overrun by one of the worst fire seasons on record. What happened next was an operation kept quiet at the time. A specialist team was sent in to defend the grove, a mission aimed at a target most of the firefighters could not be told the exact location of. Aircraft were used to drop fire retardant around the site to form a protective ring. Crews were inserted into the remote canyon to set up an irrigation system, pumping water to keep the trees and the ground around them damp as the fire passed through. They were fighting to save fewer than 100 trees at the bottom of a gorge, in the middle of a continental firestorm. And it worked. The fire reached the site. Some trees were scorched, their bark blackened, but the grove survived. The secret population of a species that had already outlived the dinosaurs came through one of the worst fire seasons in Australian history, because a group of people went into a burning wilderness specifically to save it. Think about what that mission actually meant. In the middle of a fire emergency that was threatening towns and lives across the country, resources were pulled aside, aircraft were tasked, and specialists were sent into a remote gorge to protect fewer than 100 trees. Not for timber, not for any immediate human use, because those particular trees were the last wild remnant of a lineage older than almost anything else alive, and the people making the decision understood that if that grove burned, something 2 million years in the making would be gone in an afternoon. It is one of the clearest examples there is of a society deciding that the mere existence of an ancient living thing was worth defending for its own sake. But surviving one fire, in one canyon, is not the same as being safe. A species that exists as fewer than 100 nearly identical trees in a single location is always one bad event away from disaster, one fire that cannot be stopped, one outbreak of that root disease, one unlucky combination in one small place, and the wild population could be gone. Guarding the canyon protects the trees from us, but it cannot make the species secure, because the problem is not only what might get in, it is that everything the species has is in one basket. So the real rescue took the opposite approach to the secrecy. To save the rarest tree, they made it one of the most widely planted. Botanic gardens propagated the Wollemi pine, growing new trees from cuttings and seed. And then, deliberately, they released it to the world. The Wollemi pine was turned into a commercial plant, grown in nurseries, sold to gardeners, and planted in botanic gardens and parks and backyards across many countries. A tree whose wild location is a guarded secret can now be bought and planted in an ordinary garden on the other side of the planet. That sounds like a contradiction, but it is the whole point. Every Wollemi pine growing in a garden or a botanic collection somewhere in the world is an insurance policy. Even if the worst happens in that hidden canyon, even if fire or disease takes every wild tree, the species itself can no longer be erased, because it is now growing in thousands of places at once. The rarity that made it precious was also what made it fragile. Spreading it everywhere removed the fragility. You cannot wipe out with one fire a tree that is now planted on every inhabited continent. There is an old idea in conservation that the safest thing you can do for a species is to make it useful, or wanted, or common, so that people have a reason to keep it alive, and so that it is no longer concentrated in a single place. The Wollemi pine became a clear example of that idea working. The money from selling the trees helped fund the effort to protect the wild ones. The plants spread into public gardens, where millions of people could see a living relic they would otherwise never encounter. And every one of those trees quietly reduced the chance that the species could ever be completely lost. A tree that had survived by hiding was now also surviving by being everywhere. It is important to be honest about the limits of this. Making the Wollemi pine common in gardens does not save the wild population, and it does not restore what was lost. Because the garden trees come from that same tiny, near-identical wild group. They carry the same lack of genetic variety. The species is preserved, but it is preserved as it is, a genetic near copy of itself, without the diversity that a healthy wild species would normally have. And the wild trees, in their canyon, remain exactly as vulnerable as before. The insurance protects the existence of the species. It does not protect the wild grove, which still has to be defended, quietly, indefinitely. There is also a limit to how long a secret can hold. As the tree becomes more famous and more common in gardens, more people want to find the original site. There have already been unauthorized attempts to reach the grove, which is exactly the kind of pressure the secrecy exists to prevent. Because a single careless visit could carry in the very disease that the whole strategy is designed to keep out. The protection of the wild population depends on keeping people out of one specific canyon, in an age when almost nothing stays hidden and a location can be worked out from a photograph. So far it is held. It cannot be assumed it always will. But step back and look at what actually happened here. A tree that the fossil record said had been gone for 2 million years was found alive, by chance, by one man on a rope, at the bottom of a gorge within reach of a major city. It turned out to be down to fewer than 100 wild individuals, nearly identical to one another, sitting in one hidden place, exposed to a fire season that should have been able to end it, and to a disease that could arrive on a boot. And instead of vanishing quietly the way its relatives did over the last tens of millions of years, it was pulled into safety by two opposite strategies at once. Hide the originals so completely that almost no one knows where they are, and copy the species so widely that it can never be lost. Today, somewhere in a wilderness in Australia, in a canyon whose location is deliberately kept off the map, fewer than 100 trees are growing in the same sheltered gorge their ancestors have occupied for an almost unimaginable stretch of time. They survived the dinosaurs. They survived the ice ages. They survived a fire that came for them directly. And the same species, grown from their cuttings, is now standing in gardens and parks around the world. An ancient tree hiding in plain sight, kept alive by people who found it just in time, and decided a survivor that old was not going to disappear on their watch. If you enjoy true stories of species pulled back from the very edge, stories most people never hear, then like this video and subscribe. In the next one, we will follow another survivor the world had already written off. Take care of yourself and stay curious.